And now for a word about words, volume 2. Uh, Continued. So, they were a people in chains and in misery, held in slavery by a dictator's might. They were a people whose rulers were so distrusted them, uh, or people whose rulers so distrusted them that the Red Army was not permitted to have live ammunition because they might turn their guns against the Kremlin. All this was our image. But within minutes of the invasion of Russia by the Nazis, when a self interest dictated that the defeat of Russia would be disastrous to our interests, then suddenly they became the gallant, great, warm, loving Russian people. The dictator became the benevolent and loving Uncle Joe. The Red Army soon was filled with trust and devotion to its government, fighting with an unparalleled bravery and employing a scorched earth policy against the enemy. The Russian allies certainly had God on their side, after all. He was on ours. Our June 1941 shift was more dramatic and sudden than our shift against the Russians shortly after their defeat of our common enemy. In both cases, our self interest was disguised as the banners of freedom, liberty, and decency were unveiled. First against the Nazis, and 6 years later against the Russians. To our present relationship with Tito and the Yugoslavian communists, then, the issue is not that Tito represents communism, but that he is not part of the Russian power alignment. Here we take the position we took after the Nazi invasion, where suddenly communism right became well, after all, it's their way of life. And we believe in the right of self-determination, and it's up to the Russians to have the government they like, as long as they are on our side and do not threaten our self-interest. Two, there is no question that with all our denunciation of the Red Chinese, if they announced that they were no longer part of the world communist conspiracy or alignment of forces, they would be overnight acceptable to us, acclaimed by us, and provided with all kinds of aid, just so long as they were on our side. In essence, what we are saying is that we do not care what kind of communist you are, so long as you do not threaten our self interest. Let me give you an example of what I mean by some of the differences between the world as it is and the world as we would like it to be. Recently, after lecturing at Stanford University, I met a Soviet professor of political economics from the University of Leningrad. The opening of our conversation was illustrative of the definitions and outlook of those who live in the world as it is. The Russian began by asking me, "Where do you stand on communism?" I replied, "That's a bad question, since the real question is, assuming both of us are operating in and thinking of the world as it is, whose communists are they, yours or ours? If they are ours, then we are all for them. If they are yours, obviously we are against them. Communism itself is irrelevant. The issue is whether they are on our side or yours. Now, if you Russians didn't have a first mortgage on Castro, we would be talking about China's right to self determination. And the fact that you couldn't have a free election until after there had been a period of education following the repression of dictatorship of Batista. A matter, as a matter of fact, if you should start trying to put for a free election in Yugoslavia, we might even send over our Marines to prevent this kind of sabotage. The same goes if you try. The same goes if you should try to do it in Formosa. The Russian came back with, "What is your definition of free election outside of your country?" I said, "Well, our definition of a free election in, say, Vietnam is pretty much what your definition is in your satellites. If we've got everything so set that we are going to win, then it's a free election. Otherwise, it's bloody terrorism. Isn't that your definition?" The Russians' reaction was, "Yeah, well, yes, more or less." Saul Alinsky, Revel, uh, Reveille for Radicals, Random House Vintage Books, New York, 1969, page 227. We repeatedly get caught in this conflict between our professed moral principles and the real reasons why we do things, to wit, our self interest. We are always able to mask those real reasons in words of beneficent uh, goodness, freedom, justice, and so on. Such tears as appear in the fabric of this moral masquerade sometimes embarrass us. It is interesting that the communists do not seem to concern themselves with these moral justifications for their naked acts of self interest. In a way, this becomes embarrassing too. It makes us feel that they may be laughing at us, knowing well that we are motivated by self interest too, but are determined to disguise it. We feel that they may be laughing at us as they struggle in the sea of world politics, stripped up to their shorts, while we flop around fully dressed in our white tie and tails. And yet, with all this, there is a wondrous quality of man that from time to time floods over the natural dams of survival and self interest. We witnessed it in the summer of 1964, when white college students risked their lives to carry the torch of human freedom into the darkest Mississippi. An earlier instance, George Orwell describes his self interest in entering the trenches during the Spanish Civil War as a matter of trying to stop the spreading horror of fascism. Yet once he was in the trenches, his self interest changed to the goal of getting out alive. Still, I have no question that if Orwell had been given a military assignment from which he could easily have got lost, he would not have wandered to the rear at the price of jeopardizing the lives of some of his comrades. He would never have pursued his self interest. There, uh, these are the exceptions to the rule, but but there have been enough of them flashing through the murky past of history to suggest that these episodic transfigurations of the human spirit are more than the flash of fireflies. Compromise. Compromise is another word that carries shades of weakness, vacillation, betrayal of ideals, surrender of moral principles. Uh, in the old culture, when virginity was a virtue, one referred to a woman being compromised. The word is generally regarded as ethically unsavory and ugly. But to the organizer, compromise is a key and beautiful word. It is always present in the pragmatics of operation. It is making the deal, getting that vital breather, usually the victory. If you start with nothing, demand 100%, then compromise for 30%, you're 30% ahead. A free and open society is an ongoing conflict, interrupted periodically by compromises, which then become the start for the continuation of conflict, compromise, and on ad infinitum. Control of power is based on compromise in our Congress and among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. A society devoid of compromise is totalitarian. If I had to define a free and open society in one word, the word would be compromise. Hmm. Ego. All definitions of words, like everything else, are relative. Definition is to a major degree dependent upon your partisan position. Your leader is always flexible. He has pride in the dignity of his cause. He is unflinching, sincere, an ingenious tactician fighting the good fight. To the opposition, he is an unprincipled and will go whichever way the wind blows. His arrogance is masked by a fake humility. He is dogmatically stubborn, a hypocrite, unscrupulous, and unethical, and he will do anything to win. He is leading the forces of evil. To one side, he is a demigod, to the other, a demagogue. Nowhere is the relativity of a definition more germane in the arena of life than the word ego. Anyone who is working against the haves is always facing odds, and in many cases, heavy odds. If he or she does not have that complete self confidence, or call it ego, that he can win, then the battle is lost before it is even begun. I have seen so called trained organizers go out to another city with an assignment of organizing a community of approximately 100,000 people, take one look and promptly wire in a resignation. To be able to look at a community of people and say to yourself, I will organize them in so many weeks. I will take on the corporations, the press, and anything else is to be a real organizer. Ego, as we understand and use it here, cannot be vaguely confused with, nor remotely related to, egotism. No would be organizer afflicted with egotism can avoid hiding this from the people with whom he is working. No contrived humility can conceal it. Nothing nothing antagonizes people and alienates them from a would-be organizer more than the revealing flashes of arrogance, vanity, impatience, and contempt of a personal egotism. The ego of an organizer is stronger and more monumental than the ego of the leader. The leader is driven by the desire for power, while the organizer is driven by the desire to create. The organizer is, in a true sense, reaching for the highest level for which a man can reach to create, to be a great creator, to play God. An infection of egotism would make it impossible to respect the dignity of individuals, to understand people, or to strive to develop the other elements that make up the ideal organizer. Egotism is mainly a defensive reaction of feelings of personal inadequacy. Ego is a positive conviction and belief in one's ability, with no need for egotistical behavior. Ego moves on every level. How can an organizer respect the dignity of an individual if he does not respect his own dignity? How can he believe in people if he does not really believe in himself? How can we how can he convince people that they have it within themselves, that they have the power to stand up to win, if he does not believe it of himself? Ego must be so all pervading that the personality of the organizer is contagious, that it converts the people from despair to defiance, creating a mass ego. Conflict. Conflict is another bad word in the general opinion. This is a consequence of two influences in our society. One influence is organized religion, which has espoused a rhetoric of turning the other cheek and has quoted the scriptures as the devil never would have dared because of their major previous function in supporting the establishment. The second influence is probably the most subversive and insidious one, and it has permeated the American scene in the last generation. That is Madison Avenue public relations, middle class moral hygiene, which has made of conflict or controversy something negative and undesirable. This has all been part of an advertising culture that emphasizes getting along with people and avoiding friction. If you look at our television commercials, you get the picture that American society is largely devoted to ensuring that no odors come from our mouths or armpits. Consensus is a keynote. One must not offend one's fellow man. And so Today, we find that people in the mass media are fired for expressing their opinions or being controversial. In the churches, they are fired for the same reason, but the words used there are lacking in prudence. Or on university campuses, faculty members are fired for the same reason, but the words used are personality difficulties. Conflict is the essential core of a free and open society. If one were to project the democratic way of life in the form of a musical score, its major theme would be the harmony of dissonance. And so brings to an end part two of A Word About Words from the book Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. I appreciate you joining me for a round of Billy Reed's books, and stay tuned for more chapters from books that I enjoy. If you like this, please click like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.